When it comes to human rights work, who audits the auditor? America has long positioned itself as the global authority on human rights. They sanction countries for various atrocities, sometimes providing evidence, sometimes not. They condemn other countries on the premise of having human rights issues. But as we've learned many times before, but especially now, it helps carry out or facilitate human rights abuses elsewhere when it's they themselves or their friends committing those abuses. Welcome to another video, guys, and today I'm going to be talking about an annual human rights abuse report on domestic human rights issues in the U.S., put together by an external country, a different country. Now, it's a report that you may have a compulsion to laugh at when you hear where it comes from, and that's if you wholesale believe everything that's said about the country it's coming from, of course. So the report talks about mostly the human rights situation in the U.S. and comes out every year, as I mentioned before. But I've never really spoken about it before because, to be frank, I just didn't think people would take it seriously anyway. But an undeniable shift has happened where those of you who were tricked into believing that the American government more specifically was a force for good in this world, and who may not have known much about their previous operations, suddenly find yourself questioning your whole perspective, particularly as American bombs are dropping on children in Gaza. And the ICC, who was celebrated for issuing an arrest warrant for Putin, is now being threatened and sanctioned by the U.S. for going after the Israeli leadership, just like they were sanctioned before when they even just thought about investigating American war crimes in Afghanistan. Basically, the U.S. will go after you if you try to hold them accountable in any sort of meaningful way. And that doesn't matter if you're the ICC looking into war crimes that they'd rather you not look into, or if you're Julian Assange, who's revealing those war crimes, or if you're Daniel Hale, who revealed that American drone strikes were killing civilians 9 times out of 10, or you're a whistleblower like Edward Snowden, who revealed the extent of U.S. government spying on their own citizens, you'll often find yourself at risk when you push the limits too far. However, you may be tempted to think in terms of domestic American human rights abuses, and having a report from abroad might not really be necessary, because after all, the American media regularly reports on domestic issues, right? But there's often a limit, or even sometimes a conflict of interest. America has gotten really good at dividing their population into groups so that they can fight amongst themselves and point their fingers sideways rather than upwards. If you have a news network, or actually even an online commentator, they often define themselves by the party or side that they belong to, adapting to fit into that group. I mean, this has been studied and reported on many times before, but most recently, I think by the Pew Research Center in 2021, in which they stated individuals often adjust their views to align with the party they identify with, rather than the party adapting to the values of its voters. But what's the relevance with this? Well, depending on who you're listening to or what network you're turning to, they may emphasize or underplay various issues depending on which side they belong to, and which side is seen as being responsible for the various issues that are on the table. Sometimes there might even be a financial conflict of interest when it comes to certain networks and who their supporters, advertisers, or investors are. For example, some networks might not want to talk about the rampant forced prison labor system in the U.S. due to certain relationships, or simply out of embarrassment now that they're trying to convince you that your products are made in China with forced labor, and it's supposed to be something you care about. On a side note, what makes this even more comical is that the politicians making these accusations about countries and forced labor sit on their furniture in Capitol Hill that has long been manufactured by forced prison labor. I've always found it fascinating looking at career human rights activists from America who solely focus on countries like China. I just can't imagine someone growing up and thinking to themselves, one day, I'm going to make a difference in this world and stand up against human rights abuses. But instead of focusing on fixing the rampant human rights abuse issues perpetuated by my own government domestically and abroad, even though I'm supposedly living in a society with a system of governance that allows me to make changes, I'm going to instead focus on China, a place that I often refer to as an inflexible dictatorship where I have far less of an impact or opportunity to change anything. Oh yeah, and as a matter of fact, I'm going to demand that they adopt our system of governance, because it's a system that can be held accountable by its own people. But I'm not even going to first demonstrate that this is even possible anymore and change the things that I'm pretending to care about. I mean, it's an absolutely bizarre situation, but when you look at the grants given out by the NED, a U.S. government organization described even by its own founder as something that does what the CIA used to do covertly, and that selectively weaponizes human rights abuses to hold down developing countries under the thumb of their neo-colonial systems or hold back rising powers like China, there is a lot of money involved in focusing on human rights issues abroad, except in allied countries, of course. Perhaps if the U.S. poured as much funding into people who focus on domestic human rights issues, there'd be more career human rights activists focusing on what's going on at home. But that's not going to happen, of course. So in the absence of that, this annual report does serve an important function to a certain degree. So this report is put out by China, and it's heavily backed up by many references, including from American media, to give them a bit of credit here. But what this does is it takes a zoomed out look at human rights issues in America without any consideration for left versus right or any other sort of manufactured infighting that happens in the U.S. So for somebody who wants to take a broad look at the situation in America, if you're seeking to learn more about the true face of the American government now that the mask has fallen more than ever, and especially if you're an American who feels like your country has lost its way and who actually wants to bring the focus back home and to try to make your country the place you believed it was with the values you believed it had, I mean, this might be a good starting point, especially considering it's unshaded by domestic political bias. Any sort of a domestic political bias. Now, because of where this report came from, I don't think you'll ever hear about it in your mainstream media, which is also one of the reasons I'm bringing it to your attention. I mean, from their perspective, perhaps they could bring it up in the context of trying to laugh at the idea of China criticizing their human rights issues. But the truth is, it's hard to dispute much of the actual content of the report, so it's probably better to continue ignoring it. Now, you may, too, think that China has no credibility to criticize American human rights abuses, and I'm not going to get into any specific misconceptions that feed that conclusion here. But America absolutely has lost its credibility as a human rights auditor. One major difference here, though, is that America creates these human rights campaigns with the hope and intent to actually sanction countries or deliver tangible consequences. America, however, will never suffer meaningful consequences from a human rights report criticizing them by any country. And there's less of a motive to manufacture or pump up abuses without evidence here, much like the U.S. does regularly. It's simply informative in nature. Now, I guess, of course, you could say that China's motive is to clap back at the U.S., to question their legitimacy as a human rights auditor, or in a bid to deliver a tit-for-tat response to the U.S.'s human rights reports on China. But you'll find that they don't actually really need to try that hard to convince you that America doesn't have any moral high ground here, as you've probably already learned yourself over these past few months. I will share a link to the report in the description here, in case you're interested in checking it out and authenticating the veracity of their claims. You'll find the document at the end of the article in the description that I'll paste there. But I will finish off here by reading the foreword from this year's report, which covers 2023. The human rights situation in the United States continued to deteriorate in 2023. In the United States, human rights are becoming increasingly polarized. While a ruling minority holds political, economic, and social dominance, the majority of ordinary people are increasingly marginalized, with their basic rights and freedoms being disregarded. A staggering 76% of Americans believe that their nation is headed in the wrong direction. Political infighting, government dysfunction, and governance failure in the United States have failed to protect civil and political rights. Bipartisan consensus on gun control remains elusive, contributing to a continued surge in mass shootings. Approximately 43,000 people were killed by gun violence in 2023, averaging 117 deaths per day. Police brutality persists, and at least 1,247 deaths were attributed to police violence, making a new high since 2013. Yet the law enforcement accountability system remains virtually non-existent. Taking up less than 5% of the global population, the United States accounts for 25% of global prison population, earning the title of carceral state. Political infighting intensifies as parties manipulate elections through gerrymandering, leading to a speaker crisis 2 times in the House of Representatives, further diminishing the government's credibility, with only 16% of Americans trusting the federal government. Deep-rooted racism persists in the United States, with cases of severe racial discrimination. United Nations experts point out that systematic racism against African Americans have permeated the U.S. police force and criminal justice system. Due to significant racial discrimination in the healthcare sector, the maternal mortality rate for African American women is nearly 3 times that of white women. Nearly 60% of Asians report facing racial discrimination, with the China Initiative targeting Chinese scientists having far-reaching consequences. Racist ideologies proliferate across multiple sectors such as social media, music, and gaming, and spill over across borders, making the United States a major exporter of extreme racism internationally. The United States is witnessing intensified wealth inequality, with the phenomena of working poor becoming more pronounced, and the economic and social rights protection system is seen as ineffective. Long-standing disparities in the distribution of income between labor and capital have resulted in the most severe wealth gap since the Great Depression of 1929. There are 11.5 million low-income working families in the United States, but the federal minimum wage has not been raised since 2009. As of 2023, the purchasing power of $1 has declined to 70% of its value in 2009. Low-income families are struggling to afford basic necessities such as food, rent, and energy, leading to over 650,000 people experiencing homelessness, reaching a new 16-year high. Working poor has shattered the American dream for hardworking individuals, contributing to the broadest wave of strikes since the beginning of the 21st century, occurring in 2023. Women and children's rights in the United States have long been systematically violated, with constitutional provisions for gender equality remaining absent. The United States remains the only UN member state that has not ratified the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women and the Convention on the Rights of the Child. In April 2023, the U.S. Senate rejected a constitutional amendment to guarantee gender equality. In the United States, approximately 54,000 women lose their jobs annually due to pregnancy discrimination. Over 2.2 million women of childbearing age cannot access maternity care. At least 21 states have enacted bans or strict restrictions on abortion. Maternal mortality has more than doubled in the past 2 decades. Sexual violence is rampant in workplaces, schools, and homes. Children's rights to survival and development are in jeopardy, with many children excluded from healthcare assistance programs. Gun violence remains a leading cause of child deaths, and drug abuse is rampant among youth. 46 states have been found to underreport around 34,800 cases of missing foster children. The United States, a country that has historically and presently benefited from immigration, faces severe issues of exclusion and discrimination against immigrants. Practices of exclusion and discrimination against immigrants have been deeply ingrained into the U.S. institutional structure, from the infamous Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 to the internationally condemned Muslim ban in 2017. Today, the immigration issue has become a tool for partisan gain and political blame shifting, with politicians disregarding the individual rights and welfare of immigrants. Immigration policies are simplified into partisan positions of, if you support, I oppose, ultimately becoming political theatrics to manipulate voters. The immigration crisis falls into a vicious cycle, with immigrants and children subjected to widespread arrests, human trafficking, and exploitation. The hypocrisy of political polarization and the hypocritical nature of American human rights are glaringly evident in the immigration issue. The United States has long pursued hegemonism, practiced power politics, and abused and forced unilateral sanctions. Continuous delivery of weapons such as cluster munitions to other countries exacerbates regional tensions and armed conflicts, resulting in a large number of civilian casualties and severe humanitarian crises. Extensive proxy force operations undermine social stability and violate the human rights of other nations. Guantanamo Bay Prison remains open to this day.